Welcome to Noon Wednesday. I'm Marissa Wojcik, multimedia journalist with Here and Now on PBS Wisconsin. Today is March 24. A mass shooting in Atlanta, Georgia has sent waves of fear into the Asian American community and has drawn criticism for prejudice and discrimination ignored and perpetuated by policies and culture. For a local perspective on this, we are joined by Will Shu out of Wausau. And Will, thank you so much for joining us today.
Well, thank you very much for the invitation to speak with you and your audience about this important subject.
I wanted to start by recalling a thread that you tweeted last summer, and you called it "Welcome to Wausau, Wisconsin, You're Among Friends." And you wrote about race and where you live. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, I think a lot of us turn to social media to express opinions and get feedback from others, especially in light of COVID. When you aren't able to interact with people personally, you turn to the digital world to try to get feedback on your viewpoints of the world and check yourself against maybe the viewpoints of others. I don't think that there's any one right view of race and race relations here in the United States. It's a very complex issue. But I tweeted those statements out because I do feel that there are definitely some more narrow views about race and what is right and wrong about race and our state of race relations, especially in the state of Wisconsin. Having grown up here, having gone to school here, and now being an employee and a worker and an employer, it's really important, I think, that we get a better understanding and have these conversations and dialogues about race, such as we're having today. And so a lot of those early tweets last year were about situations that I was in or things that I saw in daily life that as someone who's a minority, someone of Asian and Taiwanese descent, and I say Asian or Chinese because a lot of times even people don't understand that Taiwan is a subculture of Chinese ethnicity. And it often gets confused with Thailand. And so for these reasons, we do these simplifications in our head and on social media to make people really try to make the conversation easier. And so hopefully today we can have a nice conversation about the state of race relations in Wisconsin.
And last week's shooting was horrific, and yet some Asian Americans aren't surprised and have been trying to call attention to things that happen to them, whether it's full-on hate crimes or microaggressions. Have we been ignoring the warning signs?
Yeah, I think to your earlier question, the reason I used the You're Among Friends hashtag on Twitter stems from a joke that came out here in Wisconsin, probably in the 1980s primarily, when the tourism slogan was "You're Among Friends." And some of the probably less open ideas around Hmong American immigrants coming to, and that influx of immigration, changed the slogan to "Your Hmong Friends," HMONG. And so as Asians, a lot of times that grew up here in Wisconsin, we joke about that slogan, "You're Hmong Friends" or "You're Among Friends," because we were either confused or lumped in with the Hmong population as part of Asian American identity. And so we grew up with this understanding that, you're a minority, you're an Asian, you might be Hmong. And that was kind of the running joke. And so if you grew up in the state, you have an understanding of that slogan, you have an understanding of how that slogan, tourism slogan, was then turned into an epithet of sorts. I chose that hashtag, and then you see what happened with the Black Lives Matter movement. You see the Stop Asian Hate movement. And I think these movements are happening now here because we haven't had a real frank discussion and reconciliation of what it means to be a minority in the United States, what it means to be an immigrant. And our definition of immigrants and culture has gradually changed over the years. And then in today's politicized climate, where there's right and left and right and wrong and cancel culture, people, I think, are really struggling with how do we have meaningful dialogue about the state of race relations. Then you have a violent act, such as what happened in Atlanta. And that really brings things to a head, no different than it did in Minneapolis, which is a community I worked in for 10 years. And you see what happens there, and you get a better understanding of how something like that, just as horrific as a shooting as it was, how that can kind of really bring people to talk about it. But we've had these issues here in Wisconsin. You saw it with the shooting in Milwaukee at a Sikh temple. And we talked about it, and then we let it go because we felt like it was okay. We had resolved the issues. The issues aren't resolved. They still simmer. And all it takes is someone to crank up the heat and they bubble over. And so what you're seeing today, I think, is that long simmering discussion about what does it mean to be Asian or Asian American in the United States? And is that different? Is that a different understanding than maybe what the majority culture views our model minority to be?
And that term model minority, that has come up in signs as people are protesting across the country. We are not your model minority. What does that phrase mean to you?
As the son of Taiwanese immigrants, there is a culture of both understanding and appreciation that in order to fit in the United States, we need to assimilate. And to be accepted so that we're not viewed as lesser, to be promoted or to reach the same levels of success as others, you have to work harder. I don't think it's very different than other immigrant stories coming here from Europe or from other countries that preceded us. I think the difference is that it's more noticeable, maybe because of skin color, and maybe because of the rapid success of certain parts of our Pan-Asian ethnicity. Because it really is a very short history. I think most Americans don't realize that it was illegal for Asians, and especially ethnic Chinese, to immigrate to the United States until 1965. If you aren't familiar with Asian American history here in the US, you probably would have thought or made the assumption that Chinese people could come here because they helped build the Transcontinental Railroad. They lived in California. We had ethnic Chinese enclaves for over 100 years here in the United States, but most of them were actually illegal immigrants. Legalized immigration to the United States, especially for people who wanted to stay and live in the United States, didn't really start until 1965. And my parents were one of the early parts of that generation. That's why I said we're lucky. If my parents had been born 10 or 15 years earlier, they probably wouldn't have immigrated to the United States. And so that's part of this story that we're trying to tell today as Asian and Asian American immigrants about this brief period of time, which is really kind of in the post-civil rights era, where everyone feels like we should all be equal, right? You're post-civil rights. The civil rights movement equalized America. It equalized it at certain levels, federal levels, federal laws. But how that filtered through the social strata of the United States, it's not that rapid. That's a trickle-down type of effect. And because of that, I think we're struggling right now as a minority race with our own identity. How much do we perpetuate this myth that we should be harder working, that we should be quiet and not stand up for ourselves? Because that's how you fit in. You fit in by not sticking out. You don't want to be the sore thumb. And so these are things that in Chinese we are told and we're taught as kids: don't speak up, don't speak out, be passive, just allow it to happen, work around the system. And that's how we've become successful. Unfortunately, what it means is that when the system doesn't support you or work with you, and you have to continue to work around the system, when you want to work within the system, you really struggle with that change. And that's what I think Stop Asian Hate is really about right now, which is how do we work with government? How do we work with police officers? How do we work with other members in our community to really understand that within that social structure, we can't do it alone, and we can't do it by working outside of the system. It's how do you get to work with the system, even if the system is working against you at times.
And as you said, you grew up in Wausau. Did you experience prejudice or hate because of your ethnicity when you were growing up in Marathon County?
Yes, and I think a lot of it has to do with the fact that people didn't know how to react. I mean, early generations of immigrants, you're the first or only Asian person that they know. In fact, I was probably helped in a lot of ways as the Hmong immigrants came to Wisconsin in the late 70s and early 80s and became classmates and friends of mine, because you had a broader group of people that you could at least empathize with. And so growing up here in the community, it was definitely tough. I think a lot of Asians that grew up here in the 1970s, 80s, and 90s left the area and didn't come back because they didn't know what to expect. It was probably one of the harder decisions I made moving back here. I left Wausau in 1994 when I graduated from high school and didn't return for nearly 20 years. I spent 17 years outside of Wausau working, getting my education, and only chose to move home because my dad had started a successful business here. We were farming here. We had roots in the community. He wasn't going to move, and he had cancer. And I had a very long discussion, multiple discussions with my wife about it. My wife is Caucasian. She's from the La Crosse area. The move for her wasn't as dramatic. But for me, it brought back some of the trauma of growing up here and whether or not I wanted to raise a family here and deal with some of these ghosts of our past. And that's a reconciliation that I've been trying to make and trying to role model, unfortunately, the model minority myth, that Asians can be successful here and that we have a role to play as leaders in our community to ensure that this doesn't perpetuate into the future, whether it be about hate or violence or attitudes towards Asian Americans. We want it to stop because we have kids here in the community that are going to deal with it, especially when you start dealing with more mixed race marriages.
Have things changed now that you are back in Wausau and you've been back in Wausau for a little bit of time? Have you noticed a change?
Yeah, I would say the overt racism has definitely subsided. The things that used to be said in public, people understand probably aren't allowed. Unfortunately, what that means is that they go kind of underground or to venues and areas where they might be at least accepted, whether that be in humor, whether that be in impolite conversation amongst friends as jokes, or just with people who you believe might share those same ideas. And those don't get resolved there, those get perpetuated there. So I would say, some of the stuff that I experienced growing up here, those negative memories stick out. I doubt that those types of things would happen in this community. They still could. But there are flashes of it. You see it, especially when you start seeing incidences involving interracial violence. There was a very traumatic shooting of a police officer here and other citizens of Wausau a few years ago. A lawyer, a notable lawyer in the community was killed, and that brought back a lot of memories, a lot of discussion about race relations here in Wausau. And then it subsides. And then you hear more about it. Domestic violence issues are now in the news locally as well. And a lot of those stem from cultural beliefs around marriage and household and gender roles. And so you can't really take your eye off the ball with these types of things. When you do, you realize that they just come back. I don't think it's a problem we'll ever really get rid of. I think it's here. It's part of identity as Americans. It's here in the community. But we need to do a better job talking about it and educating it so that over time, it's an evolution that will take us to hopefully a better future, so that we can really have more normal relationships and talk about it without having the political aspects of it involved in our conversation.
Do you think people in Wisconsin are aware that this is happening in their state?
I think it depends on how much you follow traditional media, who you associate with. And then in the COVID world right now, I would say that we're more insular. we are able to self-select, or we have social media that self-selects our feeds for us, and algorithms that help us make sense of our daily news, which is an immense amount of information. And we sort our world into much simpler terms. We don't have water cooler talk. We don't get to spend lunches or time with friends and family members who may change or correct our ideas. We don't go to church if it's not meeting in person. We don't get together at the local diner on Friday mornings for coffee and breakfast. And so what happens is we start talking to ourselves. And these conversations with ourselves, unless you are highly self-aware, don't resolve the issues around race. And in the charged political climate that we're in, the likelihood that someone's going to come up to me and say, hey, Will, I know you're Chinese, Taiwanese. Tell me a little bit about your culture. What do I need to know? How was your Chinese New Year? Those questions aren't happening. And if you can't establish the basic trust at that level to ask me how my Chinese New Year is or what I do for Chinese New Year, how likely is it that you're going to want to understand more about what it means to be Asian American or what my experiences are here growing up, without feeling like you're offending someone? Those are conversations that typically have to happen in person. It's hard enough just you and I doing this conversation via Zoom, and then sending it out via social media. I appreciate that because I think it will hopefully get people to think about sometime, maybe reaching out to someone and saying, what were your experiences? What have your experiences been? How have you been doing in light of everything going on in Atlanta and some of the other shootings going on around the United States, and dealing with what that means to be Asian American? Because my parents never understood mass shootings. It's not something they grew up with. But my kids do active shooter drills at school. How do I talk to them about that? Because my parents never talked to me about mass shootings. They never talked to me about live violent activities because we never thought it would occur. And so these are the things that if you don't talk to your kids about, whether it be violence, whether it be about drinking, whether it be about racism, they're not going to get fixed. So to sit here and expect ourselves to either talk to ourselves, talk to our spouses, those just perpetuate some of the existing untruths or misleading stereotypes about any of those subject matters. What you have to do is actually go out and talk to people, understand their experiences. No different than, I try to live in this community and understand the experiences of the majority culture that live here. I do fish fry, okay? Chinese people don't fry fish, but as Americans, we'll fry fish. And I love fish fry. It's a very traditional activity. That's part of me assimilating. And if the expectation is that minorities that come to the United States have to assimilate in order to become part of the culture and be quote unquote American, then I think we're going to have a very, very long time. It's going to be longer than 30 or 50 years since the civil rights movement. It's going to take us hundreds of years to get to a place where we can even civilly talk about race. If you're unwilling to take that first step and ask someone who's of a different background than you are, no different than I think it was difficult 20 or 30 years ago for me to ask my Jewish friends what it meant to be Jewish. I can't learn it unless I go research it myself. And I have all the tools. The funny thing is we now have these tools. When I was a kid growing up, if I wanted to learn about Judaism, I'd have to use an encyclopedia or look up a reference book. Now I can Google it. I can use Wikipedia. But that doesn't replace live conversations with people who grow up in those cultures so that you have an understanding of what that race and culture is. Unless the expectation is, as Americans, that we are supposed to replace our culture and our heritage with American culture. And if that is the expectation, then as Americans, we should just put that expectation out there. You're supposed to speak English. You're supposed to look like and dress like a Westerner. You're not supposed to wear traditional garb. You're not supposed to talk in your native tongue. You're not supposed to celebrate Chinese New Year. And if that is the route that we wish to go, then we should have that conversation because that's a different America than I think what most immigrants come here expecting.
Is it difficult for you to be the one to initiate these conversations? You mentioned this idea of, just put your head down, stay quiet, work hard. Is it difficult to be outspoken about these things?
That's a very good question. I think it is difficult. I appreciate that question. I think I have a responsibility too, though, to address these questions. One, because I think I've earned some of the respect of not only my Asian American community, but those in the community here in Wausau. But I think the second reason is I've earned the credentials as someone who is assimilated here. I speak fluent English. Okay. I also speak Chinese, but my English is better than my Chinese. I was educated here. I have an undergraduate degree. I have a master's degree. These things all credential me to speak about it. So I have a responsibility to, because if I can't speak about it as someone who has either earned that respect or credentialed my way to that respect, then someone who isn't educated in the same way, who doesn't speak English as well as I do, or who doesn't have an understanding of the majority culture here in the US would never be able to address it. And I probably have experienced less racism and fewer issues than they have, because I've assimilated more easily with the majority culture or the American culture here. And so I probably am somewhat more empathetic to the minorities who, may not have those same building blocks that I was given. But at the same point in time, if I don't speak out, the likelihood that you're going to find someone who's going to willingly speak out and stick out a little bit as a sore thumb and be a spokesperson for all Asian Americans. And nobody likes being that. No one wants to be the, one black friend or the one Asian guy who speaks out or Asian woman who speaks out. But someone has to do it, because if I'm unwilling to take the first step, then it's unlikely that someone either different than me or who doesn't have that same level of understanding would be willing to speak about it, much less that someone who wants to learn more would be willing to approach me and say, Will is someone who I can talk to about it, and he won't be offended. He would welcome the conversation, especially in today's political climate, and not call me names or not think I'm ignorant. We're all ignorant. We're all racist in our beliefs about others because we've wired ourselves that way. And until we develop some self-awareness and start questioning where some of our ideas and beliefs come from, we won't be able to further our relationships as humans.
We need to leave it there. Will Hsu, thank you so much for joining us and having this conversation.
Yeah, no problem. Thank you for your time today.
For more from Here and Now and PBS Wisconsin, you can visit pbswisconsin.org. And thank you so much for joining us on Noon Wednesday.